What is happening, everyone? Just having a little late afternoon sit down by the river, as I like to do. And here we are again, delivering a new idea to talk through. And I've actually got, in a couple of hours, I've got this workshop that I've set up called Intuit. And a couple of you might have been around when I was running the persona classes, and it's a very similar setup, and I'm running them again after about a year's kind of not really thinking about that stuff. And the purpose of these workshops is going to be about 6 to 8 people in each one. It's to help people essentially work through public speaking nerves and anxiety around speaking in groups. But it also addresses many other things, and there are all kinds of benefits that are going to come out of this group discussion dynamic involving various exercises like relaxation exercises and mindful speaking exercises and things like that, just to give people an opportunity to see what's possible when they come to the fore and deliver something that they say that doesn't need to be said in any specific type of way. It's about just doing it rather than overthinking and trying too hard. And so it's that kind of exposure to being in front of other people and saying stuff and playing around with it and having fun that can really help people with issues like anxiety and nervousness and social anxiety, but also it's kind of helping with mental health in general. A lot of us are kind of spending a lot of time alone, isolated, without much social interaction, so this helps with that as well. And not to mention spirituality stuff, consciousness stuff, operating in a way that is moving away from ego and egoic boundary setting and being swayed by our own limitations and exploring what it's like to go beyond limitations through the power of mindful speaking. So that's happening in a couple of hours, but it also prompted me to speak to you guys a little bit about nervousness. You know, what is nervousness? How can we break it down in an interesting way that is ultimately helpful for us? Because in seeing how things work, you know, why do we get nervous? Why is this an element of human behavior? We can get to the heart of it, and we can potentially transcend, not to completely get rid of these emotions, because these emotions are helpful, of course, but in understanding them, I suppose, get ourselves into a position where we can manage it and not be overcome by it and not be terrified by these kinds of things. So right now I'm feeling a little bit nervous for this workshop because it's the first time I've run one of these things in a while, but at the same time the people coming are probably going to be a little bit nervous, and it's ultimately about helping with nerves. So what on earth is nervousness? And I'm going to try and be brief here, so don't think that I'm going to ramble on for 20 minutes. Nervousness. I think first of all we want to break it down into two things. There's a kind of innate response to potential dangers in our environment, which are inbuilt through evolution and that kind of stuff. We feel a quickening of the heart, we feel the fight or flight when we're teetering on the edge of a cliff, for example. That is one type of ingrained human fear that I think is a chemical response to stimulation around us, designed to help steer us away from the edge in a way that is well suited to our survival. So that's one type of nervousness, you could say. It's kind of a feeling of anxiety in our hearts, a quickening of the heart rate in response to a perceived danger. But the other sort is a kind of fabricated sense of perceived danger that you could argue tends to be associated with our interactions with other people. And as Alfred Adler once said, something along the lines of, you know, all struggle, all suffering is interpersonal. It's always rooted to something to do with other people. It's the reason we struggle in any form, in any way. The only suffering we ever have and the only anxiety we ever have is in response to how we see ourselves in the context of other human beings. And so nervousness is one offset of that experience. We get nervous when we are worried about some form of judgment from other people. That's, I think, what it tends to boil down to is I'm going to expose myself to potential public humiliation, judgment, being rejected by another human being, and that is causing a sense of fear. That's the nervousness that we're concerned about. I'm nervous for this meeting because I might do it wrong, I might look stupid, and therefore I might trigger that kind of primal fear that is in response to this idea that we might be banished from the tribe, from the group. And thousands of years ago, that would, yes, have implied a pretty nasty outcome for you. You would have been pushed out if you had done something wrong. Maybe you shagged one of the girls when you shouldn't have. You get pushed out of the boundaries of the tribe, and you were out in the cold, vulnerable, open to attack from other tribes. You were pretty screwed if you were rejected from the tribe. So we have over the years attached a lot of significance to the need to avoid being rejected. It is still lingering somewhere in there, in the dim corners of our psyche, that being judged, rejected by another human is not a good thing, because you could end up outside the tribe. You could end up vulnerable and hurt. So there's that as well. There's that kind of primal response to rejection. But if you look around you nowadays, that kind of fear needn't be there to help us. We don't need it. All it does is it reduces us to a quivering shell of our former selves. We live in an abundant society now, whereby we have lots of choices. There are lots of connections we can make, and there's all kinds of ways that we can remain self-reliant. So nervousness is not as needed as it once was. Yes, in the context of danger, but really beyond that, it's not required, and it tends to get in the way of our fulfillment, of our joy, and all of its other manifestations, whether it's fear, avoidance, depression, whatever it is. So, gosh, I could go on for quite a long time here, so I'm going to try and work this out to be a bit shorter. Nervousness in a nutshell is our perceived, it's our response to the concern for being rejected. And what happens, we tighten up physically. So nervousness is a sort of description, you could argue, of how your body reacts to the thought of being rejected. So your heart rate quickens in a response to the thought of being banished. Your chest tightens in response to the thought of being humiliated and rejected and judged. So nervousness, you could say, is a physical response to a thought that's made up in your own mind. And that alone is going to help you tremendously in understanding why a lot of this struggle that we put ourselves through is futile. We're responding to our own thoughts. Now, how do we address the root of this challenge? Do we go in and manually delete our thoughts? Well, I always thought that we could do that, but you can't. And you can't stop thoughts. You can't simply block thoughts. Many people tell me that this must surely be the way to overcome anxieties and nervousness. No, you can't go in and stop certain thoughts, but you can indirectly do something about what happens in your mind through the actions you take. So when it comes to nervousness, you want to do more of the things that tend to make you nervous, because what you're doing is you're exposing yourself to the reality that you are okay and that you can get better through practice. So taking action as someone with the identity of someone who doesn't tend to care that much because they're constantly exposing themselves is one way to overcome that nervousness. I'm aware that this could become a 3-hour-long monologue, so I'm gonna stop there. Perhaps there's a volume 2 coming on this, but always open for suggestions, comments, ideas, and questions down below. And give it some thought. If there's something in your life that continually brings you fear or a sense of nervousness, have a think about what I said and add on your own reflections to that. Perhaps there's an opportunity here for you to not turn away from your fears and your nervousness inducing things, but to turn towards those things and see them as opportunities for practice. Because it's in the doing, it's in the repeated doing of things that strength tends to arise. You tend to get better at stuff, and what happens is your mind starts to slow down, your mind starts to open up, and it finds itself no longer needing to churn out all of these warning signals that say don't do this, because the more you expose yourself, the more it's like, well, you know what, you seem to be all right, mate, I'll leave you alone, I'll step back. So demonstrate, I suppose in a way you're kind of demonstrating to your mind that things are okay by taking action in the direction of the things that often make you nervous. So, I mean, you could see this as a very extended sales pitch for one of my workshops, and it could certainly be seen as that, but I'll leave it to you. You can absolutely join one of these workshops called Intuit, I-N-T-U-I-T. It's essentially an exploration of our intuition, but also our kind of potential when we step outside of our egos and just speak fluidly and have fun with it. Do send me an email if you're interested in that. Keep following my newsletter as well, untetheredmind.substack.com, for more updates. Do like this video if you liked it, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.